facing ourselves, facing reality, right? In order to flow, in order to navigate, in order to become more, we have to face, encounter, confront, learn to relate to what is inside, which is a fractal microcosm of what is outside. And the bigger we want to become, the more powerful, the more beautiful, the more good, the more true, the more that we want to become, the more of reality, the more of ourselves that we must face, we must see, we must understand, and we must learn to love, right? Because we cannot become what we cannot love. This is an important thing in the understanding of love. Love begins by loving enough to care, caring enough to take time, taking enough time to see, seeing enough to understand, understanding enough to empathize, empathizing enough to attune with, to partner with, partnering and attuning enough to succeed at, in self-love, fulfilling our own human needs and then fulfilling preferences, loving another, supporting, holding space for them to fulfill their needs and their preferences, and to love reality, to love what is, to become one with, to become a part of, right? We cannot love what we are separate from. So to become more is to love more of what is. Now, how do we prepare to love more of ourself, to love more of another, to love more of reality in the world? And that's partly what I want to explore here. Because the one, right? The one, all that is, and the I, the part of all that is that we identify with, the I is much smaller than, of course, all that is. It's a fractal representation, but within us is, in that microcosm, all that is. The full possibility field is part of all that is. So to become more, we must love more. To become all that is, we must love all that is, which means seeing, knowing, understanding, empathizing with, and successfully attuning with all that is. Now, we don't have to get into, right? We don't have to worry about all that is anytime soon, right? We're slowly growing, becoming more as individuals, as a species. But we can look at small parts of that, right? And what I want to highlight is that within each one of us is a large probability field, a large possibility field, right? Within the human psyche, every emotional state, every human state, every psychological state exists within you and I, right? There have been moments in the process from inception to moving through the birth canal, being in the womb, to traumatic events, there have been moments of ecstasy, of despair, of complete and utter worthlessness, of extraordinary grandeur. There have been sugary moments, sour moments, bitter moments. And all of these parts exist within our bodies, within our psyche, right? Each of us could go to a place inside of complete and utter despair. That exists, of complete and utter loneliness. That exists, of complete and utter joy. That exists, right? And in order to become more, in order to love more, we must encounter more of what is inside and outside. And the question is how to prepare, how to be ready, right? And I think that one of the important guidelines, right, in understanding that we are part of an enormously large ecology, one of the important understandings to have is that the I, the ego, attaches to things that it resists or desires, right? So greed and fear, you could say. And fear is of great pain, and greed is of great pleasure. That the ego is trying to define itself to hold on to pleasure, to addiction, and is trying to resist pain and overwhelming helplessness and trauma, right? Except when it identifies with the trauma as juxtaposed against its fear of the unknown, except when it identifies with that trauma and defines itself as the victim, as the traumatized pattern. And that's me, and that's the stable thing. That's the only thing I know. And I don't want to let go of that because then I don't know who I am. I might die. I might cease to exist, says the ego, that requires some kind of stable pattern to hold on to in order to say, that's me. I'm the pattern. I am the one that thinks this, that feels this, that says this, that does this. So that's what our ego is doing. And so what we have to, we have a family pattern. That's our cultural pattern. We have a family, we have a cultural pattern. That is our pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being as an ego that is part of a family or familiar pattern, that is part of a cult or cultural pattern. And we're holding on to that. And outside of that familiar pattern is the vast unknown, right? Is chaos, is overwhelming chaos, is dread, is terror, is disorientation, is confusion, right? And when we throw ourselves too quickly into chaos, into the unknown, we tend to experience as egos the fear of death, the fear of being out of control. And so we grasp tightly to whatever it is we find, even if it's highly toxic, highly traumatic. Just because it's there, it's something to hold on to in the ego's fear of death, fear of the unknown. And so, as we slowly expand our identity, our sense of what we can see and understand and love, as we slowly expand that, one of the things to regulate is how quickly we are exposed into chaos, shock, uncertainty. Because if we can gradually move out into the unknown and have reference points that are stable, we can maintain our center, and we don't have to identify, we don't have to attach to as many patterns that we encounter. And there's also another part of this kind of expansion that ties into things such as, shock, traumatic events, how quickly we change our lives, and also psychedelic experiences where we can be thrust into parts of ourselves positively and negatively or expansively, and contract or constrictively, that we have not encountered before, right? Moments of birth in complete and utter hell and helplessness where we can't move through the birth canal, for example, and feel completely and utterly alone. Or moments of, shame and, at 5 years old where we're in a timeless space and feel like nobody loves us, right? When we're thrust chaotically into these things, the ego can hold on to them and say, that's who I am, or can resist and say, that's not who I am, right? And in both of those positions of holding on for dear life or pushing away for dear life, we're in a reaction where we no longer have freedom of movement. We no longer have freedom to flow with what is, because we're in an attachment dynamic of fight or flight, of greed or fear. And we've lost our center. We've lost our sense of balance, right? So this is the point of grace, so to speak, where, right, we need to digest in small bites, right, to keep growing, to keep exploring, to understand more of our misery, more of our pain, and to understand more of our exaltation, to reach out in all directions, because they're connected, number one. And number two, we can have a healthy and balanced relationship as we go out symmetrically in circles, right? If we meet the place of the greatest horror from a place of profound connection and expansion, there's balance, right? But if we're thrust into our smallest, loneliest parts in a place of helpless overwhelm with no counterbalance, we'll tend to hold on very tightly to that, to have a sense of control as we're navigating and thrown around in this territory, right? Or if we're successful, try to hang on in fear of, I could lose that success, rather than to enjoy it and understand the range, right? There's times that things are occurring in great influx, and there's times that things are leaving, and we don't have to attach too strongly to either one. But we can also regulate in a way, in investing, this would be taking profits when things are high and buying in when things are low, and moving towards balance, moving towards the point of grace. Hello, I'm Dane Rose, and I want to begin by highlighting one of the most shocking things that I've discovered at age 47, which is that no one has, and perhaps no one ever will, introduce me to life. No one's ever sat me down at any point and said, this is how life works, this is why it works. These are the most important aspects of life. And I find that incredible. Now, when that thought occurred to me, that 700 books in, that hundreds of courses in, that decades of introspection and learning into this life, I still didn't have a formal introduction to what this is all about, right? It seems absurd, right? So there's a moment of criticism. Why hasn't anyone pointed these things out, right? And it's fun. The adolescent's job is to criticize the inevitable and innate imperfections of everything, including the cultural blind spots that see so many of us going through life without knowing what's going on. But it's the adult's job to do something about it, right? The world is not perfect. The world is not fair. And if something bothers us, what to do about it? And this book, An Introduction to Life, is my response to that critique, my response to that irritation, that imperfection in my life. And although there are well over 100 chapters, it's the biggest book, naturally, it's a big topic, that I've ever written, I thought I'd just randomly pick a few of the chapters and, you know, to get a little bit of a sense of what's involved. So on the first, let's see, the first thing we've got the big picture, evolution. We've got the 4 operating systems of the brain, the 4 brains, and the protocols they use to filter information and make decisions. The sociopathic or reptilian brain, the rational or pattern organizing brain, the empathic brain and its decision-making protocol, and the transcendent brain, right? Now, that's one of the most revolutionary understandings that I've come across that nobody introduced me to. If we go on to 3 random pictures or windows into the book on the next page of the contents, we've got the ego, self, and breathing. We've got chauvinism and its cultural underpinnings. We've got optimal roles. We've got PTSD, a stunning thing that I didn't learn about until I was 40 years old, that has more than a 30% invisible influence on every person and on the culture as a whole. The culture and its cult-like nature, how it can be our enemy, how it can be our friend, what its role is. We have cult and ego architecture, just going into that a little bit more deeply. The next page of, another 50 chapters, we've got key cycles in life, things that you want to be aware that repeat themselves over and over again, that have throughout history, the history of humanity, and will continue to repeat themselves. What are those key cycles and how do we attune to those? Emotional literacy, right? What is an emotion? How is it different from a feeling? Now, in a psychologically illiterate culture, we don't know the difference between an emotion and a feeling, as evidenced by the fact that you, as a representation of the 99%, cannot articulate it clearly. And if you do, your articulation will not agree with the next person. Feelings and emotions, right? Positive and negative emotions. Are they the same as good and bad? Like all of this, any one of these things takes years to understand with wisdom and depth, right? But in most cases, we don't even know that we don't know about it. Grounded to reptile, right? Why we regress to the reptilian brain in traumatic states, right? Why our tether is the oldest brain. Purpose and meaning, how do we organize it? What is meaningful and what is not meaningful? Do you know the core ingredient in meaning? How to increase a life of meaning, how to decrease a life in meaning, right? Every question is a quest, and what are the quests that you're on? That's another page. 2 more tables of content pages. The deepest cuts to our humanity, right? We all live in a cult, in a culture, with a norm, a normal pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. And how do those norms undermine the human operating, which is the empathic operating system in our brain? Understanding the math of cultural impact, investing in our future, individually and globally. Losing oneself. What does it mean when we say we lose ourself? What is that self, right? And when is it good to lose ourselves and find a new pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being? And when is it a disaster? When is it a crisis to lose ourselves and perhaps regress to an older pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, being? We have advice, criticism, and direction. Some tips, right, in life. Get excellent at something. The circle in life, right? Why is the circle the most fundamental shape in geometry, in the liminal space between masculine and feminine, between duality and the one? Learn from nature, right? When wrong ideas are right, right? When does a wrong idea take us in the right direction for our sustainable well-being? It's not true, but it takes us to a better place. And in those instances, do you cling to what's true, or do you value the improvement that comes to your life? So a very light dive into the table of contents. But my belief from thousands of conversations, hundreds of books, talking with various teachers, etc., my belief is that if you are exceptional, right, if you are an architect of ideas, if you understand the building blocks of consciousness and ideas and the way they create the illusion of our reality, that you can read a book like this and spark 12 or more % of new gestalts, of new configurations, right, of your consciousness, of your frameworks. You can iterate, you can evolve. If you're a naive teenager, as I was, 90% of this is useful grist for the mill, new populations of consciousness, of ideas, right? If you're an average middle-aged person, as I am, 30% of this, if you'll skim the chapters and highlight, ooh, there might be something there for me, it might be something there here, there might be something there, and then come back and actually read those chapters that speak to you, or use it as an I Ching and open up to something. That there is going to be things that you didn't know that are useful, that can propel you to a better quality of life. And that's what makes a book an act of love, right? It's an act of creativity, but love, is a process. You have the love of need. I need you, the infant. Right? You have the love of desire. I want you, the adolescent. But then you have the love of giving. First to ourselves, adult love, and then to others, right? I'm still learning. This book was a gift for me. Someone introduced me to life through this book, right? And 30% of the ideas catalyzed have had a positive impact in the course of articulating and writing, etc. But they may also be fruitful for you. That's the gift of the information age of technology. It's not either or. Right? Once I wrote the book for me, I can print more copies for you without diluting. Right? It's a gift to me to talk with someone who's read this book as opposed to someone who hasn't. Right? So, loving enough to care, caring enough to take time, taking enough time to see, seeing enough to understand what is being seen, understanding enough to empathize, to transcend the rational brain into the human realm of empathy, understanding enough to empathize, and empathizing with understanding enough to attune, and attuning successfully enough to succeed at facilitating survival, security of survival, a sense of love and belonging, self-esteem, the articulation of ideals and the paths that take us towards those ideals, called principles or best practices. And the respect we earn by following the best practices that create the world that we state that we want, right? Earned love, self-esteem. By developing our gifts, discovering what they are. I'm good at math. I'm good at listening in a way that people say things they've never said before. Discovering my gifts. And then bringing those gifts deeper and deeper into the world in a way that creates abundance for myself, for others, that creates value. And finally, serving something, becoming a part of something bigger than ourselves. That's adult love, and it's a process of blossoming, right? And if a book facilitates self-awareness, understanding, empathy, facilitates action that leads to increased survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, discovery and development of our talents and gifts, bringing those into the world, and becoming part of something bigger. If it does that, we have succeeded at bringing a profound state of love, a transformative state, a useful state of love, an adult state of love into the world.